Welcome! Today we're doing something a little different. We're cracking open a case file that's nearly 2,000 years old, but we're going to examine it with all the rigor of a modern forensic investigation. And the document in question? The very first chapter of the Book of Acts. Okay, so to really get what's going on here, we have to completely reframe how we see this text. Don't think of it as just a story. Think of it more like a formal report, a high-stakes legal brief being filed for a very important government official. So our investigation, and we're drawing on some incredible insights from the Acts 2020 project here. It all starts with the person this report is addressed to, a man named Theophilus. You see, the author, Luke, isn't just writing a letter to a buddy. He's submitting a formal document to someone with serious power and status. And here's where it gets really interesting. Notice the specific title Luke uses for Theophilus, Christatos, or Most Excellent. Now, this wasn't just some generic compliment, no. This was a formal honorific reserved specifically for the Roman equestrian class. We're talking the procurators and prefects who actually ran the empire. Using this title was Luke's way of signaling, hey, this report is ready for official scrutiny. So let's get to the core of the case. Exhibit A, the standard of proof. How does Luke, the author, establish his central claim? Well, believe it or not, the entire case hinges on his very careful choice of one incredibly precise Greek word. A word that sets an almost impossibly high bar for evidence. And that word is Tekmerion. In the first century world, you have to understand, this was not just another piece of evidence. This was the absolute gold standard. In legal settings, in medical diagnoses, and philosophical arguments, a Tekmerion was a demonstrative, undeniable proof. It was the kind of fact that didn't just suggest a conclusion, it demanded one. And this chart just lays it out perfectly. Look at the difference. Other forms of evidence, a sign, a testimony, even a really good logical argument, all of that could be debated. But a Tekmerion, that was considered an objective empirical fact that just ended the discussion. You could say it was the ancient world's equivalent of having DNA evidence in a modern courtroom. And here is the absolute kicker. This high-powered legal and medical term appears exactly once in the entire New Testament. Just once. Luke saves this heavy hitter of a word for this single event, the post-resurrection appearances of Jesus. He's making a deliberate forensic claim that the evidence for the resurrection met the highest possible standard of proof known to his world. All right, so on to Exhibit B. We've looked at the standard of proof, but what about the investigator himself? How does Luke establish his own credibility? Because let's be real, if you're submitting a report to a high-ranking official, you better have proved that you've done your homework. Well, don't just take my word for it. This is the verdict from Sir William Ramsay, a world-renowned archaeologist who actually set out to disprove the historical accounts in Acts. But after years and years of research, he was forced to conclude the exact opposite, all because of the author's relentless, almost obsessive accuracy in tiny, verifiable details. Now, to a first-century official like Theophilus, these little details weren't just trivia, they were everything. Luke correctly identifies the obscure local title for rulers in Thessalonica, he nails the proper term for the proconsul of Cyprus, and he even gets the unique title for the chief man of Malta right. Getting these details right was a forensic signature, a mark of authenticity that simply couldn't be faked. And while Luke is definitely writing in the same tradition as the great historians like Thucydides, his method is different. His focus isn't on grand military strategies or political causes. No, his focus is on eyewitness testimony, what the Greeks called autopsia. His goal is to provide a careful, orderly account, a chronological and spatially coherent report that just lays out the facts of this new movement. And this all comes back to his training. This investigative mindset is completely rooted in Luke's background as a physician. He was trained in meticulous observation, in the absolute need for diagnostic certainty, there's our word Tekmerion again, and in the precise recording of case histories. It's a clinical precision that is just woven into the very fabric of his report. So, you have to ask, right? What was the ultimate purpose of this report? What was the intended impact of presenting this level of irrefutable, forensic-grade proof to the first witnesses and, of course, to Theophilus? And this brings us right to the theological heart of the matter, what the Acts 2020 project calls the unbroken thread. Luke's careful reporting is designed to show that the work of the church isn't some new story that starts from scratch. No, it's a direct, legally grounded continuation of Christ's own mission, a transition from his physical presence to his spiritual reign. And it's this certainty that totally transformed the apostles. Think about it. They started as this bewildered, terrified group hiding behind locked doors. But then, after being presented with empirical proof, the Tekmerion, and having their minds open to finally understand the scriptures, they became an absolutely unstoppable global movement.
You know, those 40 days of post-resurrection appearances weren't some random interlude. They were an intensive briefing period, a kind of divine incubator designed to forge an unbreakable conviction. This wasn't about subjective visions or feelings. It was about grounding their future mission in repeatable, sensory experiences, eating meals together, physical touch, and long, in-depth conversations.
Okay, so let's track how this forensic certainty became the fuel, the very engine for a global mission that had a crystal clear and strategic mandate.
Christ's final instructions weren't about setting up an earthly political kingdom. That's not what this was about. The final briefing focused entirely on the kingdom of God, a spiritual reality kicked off by his death and resurrection that was going to be the central message of their entire mission. This was their why.
And from that why, we get this brilliant mission map. It's a strategic mandate given right to them. Start local, right here in Jerusalem, then expand to the surrounding regions of Judea and Samaria, and then take this message, now grounded in irrefutable proof, to the very ends of the earth.
So, in the end, we're left with this powerful realization. The historical record of the Christian faith was intentionally built on a forensic standard of certainty. The very first witnesses demanded, and they received, irrefutable proof. The question this 2,000-year-old legal brief leaves for us today is this: on what foundation do our own conclusions rest?